Okay, if I'm on, I'm live. I'm going to just talk a little about racism and white supremacy in Appalachia. The state of race and racialism and white supremacy in Appalachia is linked to the extent to which white Appalachians hold to the ethos based on race hatred and white supremacy. Unfortunately, the last 4 years emboldened many whites throughout North America, including Appalachia. We have witnessed increasing arrogance and attempts to erase the gains and accomplishments of blacks and whites in dismantling racism and white supremacy. Coming out of COVID-19 summer was the global, was the, wait a minute, I just got a message to turn my mic off. Am I
Oh,
okay?
you're good, Wilbur.
Okay, all right, okay. Going back. Coming out of COVID-19 summer was the global protest against racism and white supremacy, spearheaded by Black Lives Matters and the killing of George Floyd. Very few people in North America, if any, escaped the recognition of the oppression of Black people worldwide and within the region. There can be little doubt that racial change needs to occur. At the seed of the change is coming to terms with anti-Black racism and white supremacy. It is difficult to ascertain the depth of Appalachian racism, but we know it is present and must be addressed to alleviate elevate Black opportunities and quality of life within an equitable society. Just lost my page. In order to gauge the extent of Appalachian racism, I want to take us back to the 2008 and 2012 Democratic primary election. More specific, the vote against Obama. Starting at 2008, starting at 2008 post-primary conversation on West Virginia, on West Virginia PBS, in which Bill Turner was cited in that PBS. I'm going to quote from that actually PBS story. The host, Finn, but it's not just religion at issue. There's also race. Exit polls from Tuesday shows that 22% of voters admitted that race was a factor in their decision. For 8% of the voters, race was the most important factor, and almost all those voters went to Clinton. Sometimes voters say they aren't racist, but their friends and neighbors are. Ann Sell, then talking to Brian Blankenship, a Logan County barber, put it this way. And Blankenship says, well, they're saying Hillary, and if Hillary don't, they're saying McCain. Sell says, so they don't like Obama. Blankenship, no. Sell, what are the reasons? Blankenship, I say because he's Black. For most of them, Finn comes in. And sometimes voters have no problem saying it themselves. Cooper comes in. You know, I didn't vote for no colored. Sales says, who did you vote for? Cooper, what's her name? Sales says, Clinton. Cooper says, Clinton, yeah. Finn, that's Morris Cooper, an 80-year-old man from Lincoln County. In all these cases, the voters weren't asked about race, they brought it up themselves. And still another writer talks about that election. A majority of Kentucky's 120 counties voted against Obama in the state's Democratic presidential primary, opted instead for uncommitted. Big margins in Louisville and Lexington saved the president from a supreme embarrassment of actually losing the state. And I'm still quoting from another article. One easy explanation, and the one regularly espoused by some Democrats for Obama's struggle in Appalachia and portions of the South, is simply that some white voters will not vote for an African American for president. And finally, one and a series of other quotes from another author. Obama, well, there is a large swath of rural America extending from somewhere in Oklahoma up into West Virginia, where Barack Obama never had a chance. It really showed last night. Kenneth Judd, prisoner number 11593-051 at Belmont Federal Correction Institution, racked up nearly 41% against the president in that state's primary and carried 10 counties, and he was in prison. There were other factors as to why Obama was not able to carry Appalachia, but given that Clinton was soundly defeated by Trump in 2016 because of her gender, for Obama, race was a factor. Race matters in Appalachia. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilburn. And if I could remind anyone who is not a presenter to please turn off your camera while we switch to another speaker.
Did you want to go ahead, Bill? You're muted, Bill.
Okay, I'm on now, huh?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I just quickly want to review a particular aspect of the subject we were talking about, race and racism in Appalachia, by reflecting back on the immediate period of high protest that we saw following the what the author Charles Blow described as, quote, the callous murder of George Floyd. And I was noting at that same time when all the protests are going on last summer, after 2 summers ago, with a lot of joy, I noticed all these crowds of young white people who poured into the streets in places in Southwest Virginia, the very heart of Appalachia, from Blacksburg and Christiansburg Mountain, all the way down to the little town of Appalachia in far Southwest Virginia. I also noticed that there was a lot of protests in the streets of Beckley, West Virginia, and Bluefield and Huntington, West Virginia, following the death of George Floyd. And then in my own home county, in Harlan County, Kentucky, you could go from Moorhead and London and Harlan and Whitesburg and Jenkins and Pikeville, all in the area of the Hatfields and McCoys, if you will, and a lot of what we call the kind of sundown towns where in central Appalachia, where we saw this reaction to the racial injustice that was reflected in the murder of George Floyd. And given my background, I was quite surprised to see that. I was quite surprised to see that the vast majority of the people out protesting in these little towns in Southwest Virginia and East Kentucky had come out of, and Southern West Virginia, these young white kids. I was quite surprised as a fellow who's approaching his 75th birthday to see that in 2020. And on the other hand, too, I'm sure that there were a lot of whites in my generation who lived in that part of the world. And when they looked out of their windows and they saw all those kids from those young people marching in support of Black Lives Matter, they were just as surprised as I am. As I would have been, rather, when I look at groups that we call like Black Voices for Trump. So all over Snapchat and TikTok and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, the mountains went down, and these young Appalachian white kids and their counterparts, they joined folks in Atlanta and Boston and Houston and Louisville and DC and all over the world following the Memorial Day murder of George Floyd. And okay, when I think about it and we fast forward to now, I'm just hopeful that these young people will follow up, that they won't just let that have been an episode that brought them out into the streets. But I hope they will follow up and demand from their high schools and their colleges that these institutions, the Appalachian Colleges Association, West Virginia University, University of Tennessee, the colleges in the mountains of the South, that they would begin to take a role in teaching more about the civil rights movement in Appalachia, how important places like the Highlander Center was in Appalachia. Students could learn a lot about civil rights and the history of civil rights by just studying, for example, the history of Berea College, in particular, Maryville College in East Tennessee in particular. They could learn a lot about the Highlander Center in East Tennessee, and where Rosa Parks and Miles Horton and Zelphia Horton and Don West and all these people came together 75 years ago in the mountains of the South, where the civil rights anthem, "We Shall Overcome," came out of Appalachia. All the way back to John Brown and Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, where people were very supportive of the, well, you might as well say where the first shot was fired in the Civil War was fired there in Harper's Ferry. And of course, SNCC came into the Highlander Center. There are many pictures of John Lewis, Stokely Carmichael, and people from the what was called the militant side of the movement in Appalachia. If folks would study Appalachia, they would also understand that these scenes that we saw, this racial solidarity with Black Lives Matter, it went from Lookout Mountain in Tennessee to Black Mountain near where I live. Now, however, if you fast forward a little bit, Charles M. Blow has a new book out called The Devil You Know. And in that book, Blow refers to the millions of people who came out in support of Black Lives Matter after the killing of Floyd. In a study he reviewed that came out from the Pew Research Center, it noted that about 16 million people within a month of George Floyd's death came out to protest, and that the percentage of people out protesting in Appalachia reflected the percentage of people who reflected rather the racial split, the racial profile of the protesters. He noted, for example, that the percentage of whites who protested after the Floyd murder, the percentage of whites was almost 3.5 times the percentage of protesters who were Black, and that the percentage of Hispanics who were protesting was higher than the percentage of Black people. Monuments came down. Black Lives Matter Square on 16th Street Northwest in Washington, D.C. came up. Many companies made all these commitments. They took the Aunt Jemima off of the pancake box. The companies came forward and changed the name of Uncle Ben's Rice to some other uncle, I guess, I don't know. All manner of TV studies and specials have come out since George Floyd. All these books on anti-racism have proliferated like so much kudzu. And then Charles Blow asks, or in fact he asserts, I think all of that protest was really just some feel-good measures that cost people nothing, and it did nothing to shift the power. He said we should never forget that despite the white protests after the death of Floyd, a majority of white people, both men and women, voted for Donald Trump in 2020. Trump, in fact, going back to Black Lives for Trump, Trump received more non-white votes than any president since Richard Nixon in 1960. And so the only thing that he says came out of when we think about the white protests in the mountains, is that it was only in Georgia that it really made a difference, where Black people got really organized and turned the Senate for the state of Georgia into Democrats. So that's my review. The caution that we have not seen a lot of sustained follow-up from protesters in support of these movements. And so we'll use that as a basis for circling back later on in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Did you want me to go ahead, Darren, or did you want to?
You go ahead, Cicero, and then
Okay.
I'll.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Wilburn, and thank you, Bill. I'm going to start off with something that I thought was rather remarkable in my life, at least. In early January, I was contacted by a law firm to write a deposition in support of a case of a gentleman in West Virginia that had been physically accosted and brutalized by a cop. The background of the story is that this 50-year-old Black gentleman who who was having issues with his white girlfriend at that time, who was a crack addict, who wanted to use his house to engage in crack, said no and decided to call the police to get her removed from his residence. The police show up, and initially there are cordial relations. The two 20-something white officers know the gentleman. They're from the community, and they treat him with the respect that should be accorded a 50-year-old black gentleman in his own home. But as soon as he is able to evict his girlfriend, and I use that term loosely, as soon as he's able to evict his friend, he hauls out. She's still talking as she leaves, and he says, you know, look, good riddance and whatever. And the police, the head officer at that time, essentially says, you get back into your house, because the gentleman has stepped outside onto the front stoop. And says you can say anything you want to in your house, but you can't say anything outside of your house. And the gentleman says in response, well, hey, look, this is my house. This is my First Amendment. I'm not endangering anybody. I'm speaking my mind. She's speaking her mind. Well, then what happens as the officer begins to go back to his car, he literally turns around, goes back to the gentleman, and beats him to a pulp, knocking out several teeth, breaking his jaw. And along the way, he calls him, boy, you better mind what I say. Now, this is a 20-year-old, 20-something cop, white cop, saying to a 50-year-old man, boy. And if there's any term that has had historical resonance other than the N-word, no word has had that, I would argue, no word has had that significant resonance as the word boy, from being directed from a white man to a black man. And that prompted me to kind of look at what is the nature of racism, white supremacy within the state, within Central Appalachia. Folks should know that hate groups, while the number of hate groups has been reduced from the high of 2018 to now today. You have 36 hate groups. These are figures from the Southern Poverty Law Center. You have 36 hate groups in Pennsylvania. You have 4 in West Virginia. You have 13 in Kentucky. You have 34 in Tennessee. You have 20 in Alabama. I could go on and on to recite the numbers within Appalachia as designated by the Appalachian Regional Commission. But it's interesting to me that the numbers, of course, the numbers in large measure, the heightened number, to some degree, except for really West Virginia, correspond to numbers of Trump support in 2016. Folks will know, or should know, that 68% of West Virginians voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Nearly 69%. 63% of Kentuckians did. 61% of Tennesseans did. 62% of Alabamians did. Now, there's not a direct correlation, of course, but those are interesting numbers, interesting percentages to look at. For the most part, I would suggest that in what has been the historical reality of West Virginia, as one authority notes way back in the 1960s, that, and let me get to my place here. In a border state like West Virginia, the cutoff line exists by tacit agreement instead of law. Negroes were denied access to many parts of the public arena that white citizens took for granted. They were restricted to the lower levels of industrial occupation, They were seldom ever allowed to enter the white-only area of management. They were restricted to specific residential areas, and they were generally excluded from private circles of white association. In comparison to the Deep South, there was less overt hostility and denigration, less conventional prejudice, but this merely made whites less aware of the color line where Negroes felt it justly as keenly. This is from a scholar reporting on the state of race and racism in West Virginia in the 1960s. Getting back to this whole notion of boy and the historical resonance that it carries, you know, from its atomizing effects have been chronicled from the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass to Dr. King's seminal letter from a Birmingham jail. Its use, especially by a younger white man to an older black man, in my mind, demonstrates the inability of a racist to recognize his own prejudice. It is evident of a mindset, one deeply ingrained, of one unwilling to recognize the humanity of another human being. And its verbalization indicates an intentional attempt to project and normalize his belief that black men are mentally, physically, and spiritually inferior. When used in the context of the historically disproportional power dynamics that have existed in America and in the state, and could be argued within Central Appalachia as well, between people of color and whites, that were manifest in the interaction of a white police officer in his 20s and a local black man in his 50s, that were supported by the explicit use of power of his position and the historical weight of his racial status, as well as the presumed lower class status of Mr. Houghton, there is no doubt in my mind that this was a racially motivated action. It is interesting to me that in 2015, speaking of West Virginia again, in 2015, blacks comprised 4% of the state's population, but yet 17% of the jail population and 12% of its prison population. In 2019, African Americans were incarcerated in West Virginia prisons at a rate that was 3.5 times that of whites. In 2016, blacks were arrested at 2.4 times the rate of whites in Charleston, the state capital, where nearly 30% of the arrests in the city made by the Charleston Police Department were African Americans. It is interesting also to note that the state has had robust discussions over Confederate statues that remain, including Confederate General Thomas Stonewall Jackson in Clarksburg and on the state capitol grounds. To date, neither have been removed. In truth, it is past time for the state and its recalcitrant white citizens to confront its Confederate past and its racist legacy. I'm going to leave it there because in truth, I think that while the number of hate groups have diminished, hate has not diminished. And so I think this is something we need to continue to grapple with and to recognize as we move forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cicero and Bill and Wilburn. And I'm gonna offer some observations here, not so much any statistical data, but I will say this, first that I am very honored to be a part of a panel that includes Bill Turner and Wilbur Hayden and Dr. Fain and Cicero as well, because of the deep work that they've already done to kind of uncover and articulate what the African American experience in this space that we call Southern Appalachia has been. As I listen to them, now I'll say this too, that we've been in conversation together about the state of race and race relations and racism in Southern Appalachia for at least the past year and a half, maybe more, as we've worked through individual projects and a collective project that we're working on to bring out another version of an updated version of Bill's seminal work on Blacks in Appalachia. Since I'm in Asheville, I'm not in Asheville right now, but Asheville being my home, it's interesting to think about what is happening in the urban space of Asheville and compare that to the comments that have been made about the larger region of Southern Appalachia in general, especially looking at the more rural spaces in the region. And it brings the question for me, you know, over time, what will the impact of urban Appalachia be, or what impact may it have on rural Appalachia? Because here in Asheville, where I am, you know, the conversation around issues of race have become much more robust, as many of you have probably been following. I'm also intrigued by another question too about institutions of higher education in Southern Appalachia. What will their impact be over time? As Bill talked about this issue of follow-up to the issues that have been raised, especially with the death of George Floyd and how that has galvanized so many people in the region. What impact will institutions of higher education have on these conversations as we move forward? I think that's something for us to think about. In Asheville, you have UNC Asheville. Further to the west, about an hour to the west of us here in Asheville, you have Western Carolina University, and I know that the conversations there around issues of race, racism, the legacy of the Confederacy continue to be very robust. I believe that to be the case in places like the University of Tennessee as well in Knoxville. Bill and I have been in conversation with some folks there who are very interested in continuing those conversations and looking for ways that institutions and organizations that have a major impact on life in those regions are in those particular spaces in those cities can continue to kind of deal with issues of race, diversity, and inclusion. I think, you know, Bill here, I can't help but think also of the work that Cassius Cash is doing as well in the Smoky Mountain Park to try to bring these conversations around race and racism to the fore. So I wonder as I listen to this, what will the impact of these institutions? I mean, Bill talked about the Highlander Institute, which had major impact on moving the civil rights agenda in the larger country forward. What has that impact been in Southern Appalachia? One of the things for me, as somewhat of still a newcomer to the subject of race in this region, that I have seen, especially in the space of Western North Carolina and Asheville in particular, has been this kind of a lack of awareness among the larger population, among whites, about the African American experience in Southern Appalachia. That awareness, I think, is expanding. There's also been, I think, a lack of awareness among even African Americans themselves of what that experience has looked like for them in the region and how it has been unique. That awareness, I think, is changing. I think people are becoming much more self-conscious of the contributions of African Americans in the region. And that is going to continue to, I think, drive forward these conversations. As many of you probably know, here in Asheville, and Bill, I'm interested to see what the follow-up on this is going to be as you talk about follow-up with regard to these issues around George Floyd and the continuation of energy around the Black Lives Matter movement in Southern Appalachia. Here in Asheville being one of the first places in the country to actually call for reparations for the African American community. That's not only been in Asheville itself, in the city of Asheville, but also the county. And I was just in conversations last week with the city manager of Asheville about how we continue to move those conversations forward, that this won't be just something that is done for kind of window dressing to say that we have at least brought up the conversation, but how do we actually come up with practical policy that really addresses the issue of reparations for the African American community. It's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds in Asheville, and then to see how that impacts conversations around race in the larger sense in the region as well. So I'm interested in hearing what you all think of those two questions. What will the impact of urban Appalachia be on the rural areas? Because in Cicero thinking about these, and Wilburn thinking about these voting patterns that you all have talked about, I mean, it's not lost on me that while a city like Asheville, which has a very cosmopolitan culture, being in the heart of Southern Appalachia, especially for Western North Carolina, in a sense, in many ways, it's a bubble. It exists in a bubble in this rural space. So when you look at voting here, Asheville goes largely for Democrats, which it did again this time, but the region as a whole went largely for Republicans. And in fact, we ended up, the congressman that many have probably been following, Madison Crawford, I think, who is right now the youngest member in Congress who represents this district. So I continue to think about, okay, what will the larger impact of what is going on in the urban spaces and in institutions of higher education in the region? And Bill, I will bring in East Tennessee State University and the work that is going on there and the conversations that are happening there around issues of race. Will this just exist in a bubble, or will it eventually have a larger impact on how race and racism and race relations look in the larger region? So I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you, Darren. These are all really thought-provoking questions and give us inflection points to kind of start off our dialogue. So we're opening it up to the audience, and we welcome your questions, your comments, and who would like to start us off?
I wouldn't mind starting off. First of all, thank you for sharing your experience. I really appreciate you all coming to your panel and just having this opportunity to listen. One of the things that I'm becoming more aware of, my best friend, Sean, is a Black man born and raised in Southern Appalachia and has since moved to more northern states and more cosmopolitan areas. And especially as I was listening to Darren and some of the figures about the last election, I'm discovering more and more that it seems that there is a unique experience in Appalachia of being Black. Like there's this larger conversation of racism and anti-Blackness. But there also seems to be within that, because it's not a monolith, an Appalachian experience. And I wondered if anyone would maybe be able to speak to that, as that's something that I'll probably never experience.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it I think it's a complex one, because it makes me think of my personal experiences, separating them out. My personal experience dealing in racism. I grew up in Huntington, which was and is an urban space, progressive, home of Marshall University. In many ways, it speaks to Darren's observation and challenge for us to kind of talk about the impact of urban presence. But even within my urban environment, growing up and being raised in Huntington and its progressive nature, hey, I got called the N-word at 12. I got by a kid who was probably 2 years older than I was. When I was teaching at Marshall, I got, even before I got to take that back, even before I left, and when I was going to school at Marshall, myself, my two brothers, and a cousin spent the night in jail because there was a fight between a dust up between my family members and some whites at a local club. I was not even involved in it, but I got a call and said, "Hey, your brothers and your best friend or one of my best family friends are getting arrested." So I drove down. I went and sought the head officer, and I said, "Excuse me, sir. I see this is my brother, my other brother." I said, "I heard there was a fight between whites and blacks." I said, "Where are the whites in this? Why aren't the whites being arrested?" And the officer said to me, "You say another word, I'll arrest you." I said, "Well, excuse me, sir." Boom. I couldn't say anything else. From that point on, I was thrown on the hood of his car, handcuffed, and taken down to the jail with my family and a good friend. We spent the night in jail. My dad had to come out and bail us out. Those incidents make indelible imprints on one's life. Even when I was teaching at Marshall, I got followed by a police car driving while black. Officer followed me for about 3 miles until he pulled me over. And I had to tell him, I said, "Look, sir, I saw you from the moment you pulled out following me. I observed the speed limit. I observed the stoplights. So don't come up here talking about I broke some law." He backed down, and to this day I regret not getting his badge number or name because I was so pissed off that I just lost it. I don't know if this is. I just wanted to share that with you because I think it is. I think it is pertinent, and I would certainly want to allow my esteemed colleagues to weigh in as well.
Bill, I see you smiling, Bill. Do you want to jump in here? Now I don't want to assume anything. Cicero, you and I have not talked about this, but I think I might be the youngest person here on the panel.
Damn it!
So,
yes, you are.
Okay. Okay. And as Bill is often amped to say, I wouldn't consider myself a spring chicken either, Bill. So at 54, I'll be 54 soon. But so it's interesting to listen to these experiences. I want to hear what you have to say, Bill. But I will say that to the person who asked the question and making the comment about this not being a monolithic experience for African Americans in the region is so true. Because my experience here in Asheville growing up in the 70s and the 80s is so different. And Asheville is a unique and very a different space and always has been. And I think that has a lot to do, as many have argued, with the massive presence of the tourism industry in Asheville and bringing in so many people from the outside. Who have had a major influence on how Asheville has developed and that cosmopolitan nature of the culture in Asheville. So my experience has been very different. I mean, and Bill knows through work that we've done, especially looking at the photographic work of my own grandfather, Isaiah Rice, which many people have read the article that we published on his work back in 2017. That his work is interesting in that it shows this extremely vibrant Black middle class in Asheville, which had very different experiences from what you get especially in the rural spaces. And because I grew up in that kind of environment, my having any direct run-ins with issues that would be called racial in nature, I was kind of shielded from that growing up. So I didn't have those experiences here in Asheville. However, what I find interesting now is that it seems to be the reverse of that these racial incidents seem to be greater now than they were when I was growing up, even in a city like Asheville. And that really begs the question of what has changed. What I have found interesting about the younger generation of students, especially African-American students who I have been in conversation with a lot, is that they have been willing to really have a conversation about, what, while, proponents of integration also are willing to step back and look at what was perhaps lost with integration when that occurred. So I think that these are major questions, and I think it had some impact on the different experience that I had here. But I want to turn to Bill or Wilburn to see if they will challenge some of what it is that I just said here.
Go right ahead, Wilburn.
No, I'm gonna pass on this one.
Okay. Well, I'm probably passing on it too. But I would like to mention, I think, framing that in a way that I am beginning to see following the work of Ron Eller. Must have been 2009 or so. We all remember Ron's book called Uneven Ground. The look at Appalachia since the founding, since 1945. But with the founding of the ARC in 1964, Ron's work helps us to understand a lot, I think, about Blacks in Appalachia too, when we look at where things are happening in terms of where the greatest percentages of the total population, you will find Black people in different parts of Appalachia. For example, my last look with the most recent census still shows that the highest percentage of the population, of a population with Black people in central Appalachia, is none other than McDowell County, West Virginia, specifically in Keystone, West Virginia. However, Keystone and McDowell County remains one of the poorest counties in the ARC's 400 or so counties. So I'm doing a paper right now that you guys are familiar with as we work toward this new look we're trying to do in terms of not only just Blacks in Appalachia, but a specific what have been some of these demographic shifts and the implication of all of the out migration since the 1980s. For example, what do you get? We all know the impact in terms of the civil rights movement in Birmingham and different places when the civil rights leadership turned to say, ultimately what happens in municipalities and wherever you are, it depends largely on which way the large corporate entities move things. When they start moving, people in the surrounding area start moving. When for example, certain CEOs say we have to do business this way, the business is affected, the bottom line is affected by what kind of climate we live in. So I wonder what happens when you look at what are the major businesses in Western North Carolina. And I'm finding, and I know all of us know this, but that amongst the places where you do want to look is the higher education institutions in East Tennessee, the higher education institutions in West Virginia. I'm watching very closely, for example, on this matter of race relations in Appalachia. A month or two ago, the young Black athletes, basketball players at Bluefield College, not Bluefield State now, which is in West Virginia and HBCU, but Bluefield College in Bluefield, Virginia. Their basketball team took a knee during the playing of the national anthem. They won the game. However, the next day, the president forfeited the game and said, you will not take a knee as long as you're wearing a Bluefield College uniform. In fact, he went on to say, quite controversially, that when you put on a Bluefield State uniform, you're not yourself. You lose your right to free speech. You cannot do that as long as you have a white uniform. That says a lot because what happened, his alumni called him and said, look, if you allow those black fellows to protest at basketball games, we're going to withdraw our support of Bluefield College. So the president, the same thing was happening here in, we see it at the University of Texas. A song called "The Eyes of Texas Are Upon You." Some people considered having some overtones back to the early 1900s when that song was rendered by white students in blackface. Well, the contemporary black athletes say they don't like that. But the alumni, some of the wealthy alumni came along and said to the president, get you some more black basketball players in. We don't need those because we're going to have that song. There's nothing wrong with that song. We don't care what they say. So one of the things we see happening when you look at what are the big healthcare institutions saying in Appalachia? What do the CEOs of these healthcare companies, and particularly the nonprofits in Appalachia? You have a lot of nonprofits that operate in Appalachia for what you might call intervention for community improvement. But you go and look at the boards of most of those companies, most of those nonprofits in Appalachia, and you find that they're as white as the driven snow, that they do not have representation of black people, even in those towns where you have black folk. Darren, you spoke to what they are doing to improve the most visited tourist spot in Southern Appalachia is the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Go to Dollywood. And that is one of the most visited places in the South, but it is also one of the most segregated places in the South. And so Dolly Parton herself has been speaking out to that. So when we look at the higher education institutions, when we look at urban areas, Ron Eller was right. There's a lot of uneven development. You know, when you go to Asheville, the situation there is quite different than 25 miles away over in Haywood County, or up near Blowing Rock, or some other parts of Asheville is, as you said, in a bubble. But what about Bluefield? What about Pikeville? What about Hazard? What about Corbin? What about Blacksburg? And you know, so we can find ways to look at that. And I think that's one of the challenges of people who are devoted to the Appalachian Studies Association, is that there are a lot of demographic shifts going on in Appalachia that I think are really ripe grounds for students to do research and to understand these places much better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope we answered that question for you. Did you have a follow-up at all?
I do not have a follow-up. That was beautifully stated, and thank you so much. I really appreciate you speaking to that lack of a monolith and the various experiences there, and how we can like continue researching that, and I can develop a bit more of a wider sense instead of just where I am.
Sure.
I do see that there is there's another question in the chat. Unless anyone has anything to speak to my question, I don't mind if we move on.
I would say, I'm sorry, I'm going to say one thing about this, because I do, it is important to recognize, yeah, we're not a monolith. And the importance of, Bill mentioned it, the importance of corporate or institutional intervention. At Marshall, the new president, Dr. Jerome Gilbert, from Mississippi State, I believe, is initiating a cultural change at that institution, and that is reverberating out, I would like to think, to the city and the region. He hired the first black head football coach in the history of that institution from Alabama. And so I think that shows a shift in mindset. Now, this is coming off of the previous coach, being the coach of the year in the conference. But there was a need for change. Evidently, Dr. Jerome Gilbert initiated it, and I think that's going to pay significant dividends culturally, economically, Institutionally, down the road.
What I like to add to that too, in terms of a specific instance, uh, some work being done, part of which has been propelled, if you will, by uh, 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 folks out of the University of Kentucky, though quite removed in Lexington. They're doing some work called the Sun Up Project in Corbin, Kentucky. And, Corbin had a kind of Tulsa-like expulsion of Black people almost around the same time in 1919 or so. So the Sun Up Project in Corbin, Kentucky, I think speaks well to what local people can do with the help of folks located out of, the folk I know who are helping at Corbin or at the Appalachian Center at the University of Kentucky. So I think that the universities, the small colleges, there's 36 or so, I think, colleges in the Appalachian Studies Association, and a lot, not Appalachian Studies Association, the Appalachian Colleges Association, the Bereas, the Warren Wilsons, the small colleges in the mountains, Maryville College, Campbellsville University in Kentucky, and so. I think that we can find a lot of bright spots where folks are doing things that are very progressive, and I don't think we should. I think we should certainly try to find out more about what those organizations are doing, and especially to support them.
I think that actually beautifully flows into the next question in the chat. Says from Susan Weaver, I have not lived in Huntington a very long time. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. Let me start with the first question. Still Susan Weaver, though. What efforts have been successful or that you would like to see to bridge the divide that seems to lead people in general, and especially non-whites, toward Republican voting, as cited by Dr. Fain?
Well, this is one.
Wilburn, Cicero, I'll back you up on that too. I agree. It's the first thing that comes to mind. Really the raising of awareness has been key here. And here, I go back to Bill and even Wilburn and the work that they've done early on to really lay the foundation for the building that is occurring. So you got many new scholars who are taking interest in, as Bill referenced, with the work that's going on in many of these institutions of higher education. I know in Asheville, at UNC Asheville, the work that we've done, not only through an annual conference that we've hosted for the past 7 years that has focused specifically on Black life in Western North Carolina and Southern Appalachia, I think that it has had a major impact on the serious nature of the conversations around reparations in the city of Asheville. I think without that raising of awareness, I don't believe we would be here where we are now. And what I'm finding hopeful about the conversations around reparations in Asheville, however that conversation unfolds, that is not just one color that is involved, not just African Americans who may be helping to drive the conversation, but it's multiracial, and the people who are serious about this, having a conversation around this. Secondly, I think that and Bill knows, Bill has been a guest on radio show and podcasts that I've done with my colleague Dr. Marcus Harvey in Asheville for the past since 2014 we've been doing that show, and I think that show, which has from time to time focused specifically on issues related to the African American experience and race in Southern Appalachia, has really raised the awareness of people about what that experience has been. I can't, if I had Bill, if I had money for the number of times that people have written in to say we just didn't know these stories, and especially with regard to responses to shows that you have been on. You know, I'd be pretty wealthy guy right now, but I think, you know, Cicero, what you're saying, that what we're doing even here, what the Appalachian Studies Association has done by creating a space too where these conversations can occur, I think has been key to helping to at least giving us the possibility of building those bridges that Susan was talking about.
Let me come in if you would.
Please, Wilburn.
I'm gonna try to respond to that question from a different perspective, away from the institution or macro or programmatic ways of trying to address it. Because I moved pretty much in my thinking until white people began to become conscious of the issues around race affecting Black people, we're not going to go very far, no matter how many macro solutions, institutional solutions that we do. So I'm coming from the other side, and I think we need to look at the micro. We need to get whites to come to terms with their racism and their white supremacy on a personal level. And that takes a lot of different ways there's a lot of different ways you can do that, but you gotta be part of these discussions. You gotta be reading, and you gotta be open enough to recognize that the experiences that the majority of white people have had in Appalachia is very different from Black people. And when you start from that micro, then you should be able to begin to challenge not only yourself, but other whites, your family, your parents, about their attitudes about Black people. Because if we don't reach this personal impact of white folks, we're going to just continue to have programs and opportunities that will dry out on the vine. We've got to get change in the minds of folks.
I'd like to add a little to that too. Wilbur, I think your point about the micro level is very important, particularly in terms of how it can influence the leadership development of young Black students on these predominantly white campuses that we've been alluding to a little bit. I'll have to mention, as we all know, it's our personal experiences that inform us best. When I was young, I had grown up in Harlan County, had no idea about its role, its place in the bigger picture of Appalachia or anywhere else for that matter. And then I met a man named John Stevenson in 1966. And John had become he was my teacher. And John reached out to me, to use an analogy, the way the kind of football coaches and basketball coaches reach out to young Black athletes, take them into their homes and say, you can do this, you can do that, you should work on this. I want to challenge and ask white faculty members who are walking around on these campuses, and they have in their personal hearts what they would like to see happen in the region, is to bring some of these young Black kids on campus under your personal tutelage, under your personal mentorship, and bring them under your wing the way John Stevenson did for me, and bring them to these Appalachian Studies meetings, teach a course and bring them in. I think we need to begin to try to grow young Black leadership inside these institutions, whether they are large or small, because a lot of the kids that can grow up 20 miles from UNCA, they don't really know. We need to grab them, don't we, Darren, and say, this is what Appalachia is all about. This is your home, so that we can keep them involved. There's this group called the Black Youth Appalachian Rising, which is associated out of Highlander with the Stay Project that is trying to keep young white kids from going away from home. So we can do the same thing with those young Black folk. I want to commend people to take a look at some good things coming out of Jonesboro, Tennessee at the International Storytelling Center. They are telling the stories of Blacks in Appalachia in a way that has never been told before. There's William Isom, whom I sometimes call the Spike Lee of Appalachia, because William is doing some wonderful things on film, capturing some stories all over Appalachia, East Tennessee, Southern West Virginia. Emily Jones Hudson in Hazard, Kentucky, in association with some projects coming out of Kentucky State University, has founded the Southeastern Kentucky Appalachian African American Center. We want our white friends in that area to help build these Black institutions. The Appalachian African American Cultural Center in Pennington Gap, Virginia, Ron and Jill Carson, they are doing some wonderful things. There's some folks out of Virginia Tech feeding into that. There's a Laurel County African American History Center that Wayne Riley has been running for years out of London, Kentucky, quite close to Corbin, Kentucky. Catherine Ingle knows that. I see she's on this thread. So there are some positive things, and I can't stress more how important it is for white faculty members to engage personally with these Black kids on these campuses and help in their leadership development, the homegrown ones, so that 10 years from now, we'll have some young Black people with a PhD that you have tutored, that you have helped to go to graduate school, and so that they can stay in the region and be on that faculty at Bluefield State.
Yeah.
You know, that's the point. Yeah.
I want to add, in terms of my mentor, was Dr. Helen Lewis, who, while I was finishing my graduate degree, she brought me under her wings and began to let me get conscious of my identity as a Black Appalachian. I would go back to William Alston as well. He will be doing a pre-recorded session, the plenary Sunday, and I think it may be you can access it before then, in which and I'll be one of the talking heads on that. So that's something that if you want to look at one of his works, that will be Sunday afternoon. Is when it's aired in the program, and but I think you may be able to see it before then.
Do we have another question out there? Or comment? Please.
Hi, thank you so much for what y'all just said. I am a sociology professor at Ferrum College, and we're one of the ACA schools, and we are so fortunate to be about half non-white, half white. And yet, I'm really fired up, have always been, to help the students, help the faculty, help the administration really see our place in this. So thank you for firing me up. I've been using Frank X. Walker for 20 years in all my intro social classes, in everything that I do. And we have a new opportunity. Speaking to all of what y'all are saying, the urban Appalachian area, right there in Roanoke, you know, where we had urban renewal absolutely destroy the Black community. And so I'm hoping that the kinds of things that you've talked about, the notes I've done, will be able to be leveraged for me to suggest some new areas. But not only Little Ferrum. What about Ferrum and Virginia Tech, and coalitions for these state and private schools that are in Appalachia that have finally gotten a sense that it's not a stigma, it is a wonderful thing. And what can we do? So thank you for inspiring me. Each one of you, I've written down everything I possibly can to use as leverage, but also to just re-inspire me, because I'm at, close to retirement age, and I'm like, I don't know if I can push this anymore. I'm going to do it on my own time, in my own way, but I can't give up on the institutions. Dr. Turner, you've reminded us of that a lot of times. And I take the students to see Ron Carson. The last time we went down there, we had these first-year students, and he laid it on the line. White people, you got this racism going. And what a conversation that led to for the rest of the semester. Those kids never got over it, and they were angry. The white kids were. And we just massaged it and massaged it. And they're still probably angry, but the truth was told. So thank you for reinvigorating me. I don't know if I wanted to be reinvigorated, but you daggone done it. So here we go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any comment, gentlemen?
I'll just say, Sister Ra, I appreciate, just as you said, thank you. I appreciate those comments and
Yeah.
the perspective that she offered.
You know,
That's how the work is going to get done. Yes.
I think I do want to go back to Ms. Weaver's question about building bridges. I think one of the major challenges is, there is the rural-urban divide. I mean, my state, West Virginia, has historically been predominantly white, and of course predominantly rural. And so, how do you build bridges between these two discrete populations? That's not saying that each of them is monolithic, but there are certainly some prevailing characteristics of white rural West Virginians and probably by extension white rural Appalachians and those within an urbanized college town atmosphere. And remember now, Bill mentioned McDowell County. McDowell County is the worst county of the 3,152 counties in America in terms of longevity of life. Think about that. And so if there's ever an opportunity, I would say for folks to kind of look at their situation and say, well, what the hell am I doing in drinking this Kool-Aid, so to speak? If this is my circumstance of life, it's not about grievance politics. It's about getting out of your mindset, as Wilburn alluded to, having some open-mindedness, taking a risk, and be willing to grow and stretch yourself. That's a tall order for a lot of people who have the intergenerational proscriptions enshrined upon them by folks who are at least, maybe at the minimum, apathetic to Black people, and at the worst, have great hostility towards Black progress.
If I want to go back to, and I'm making a lot of noise in his mic, but the last 4 decades, I've looked at the census data to look at the Black Appalachian population, and this is support the comments I've already made. In terms of where Blacks are located, about 80% of Blacks are located in the small towns, cities in the region. For whites, that's a little over 30%. So that those figures we were talking about, are one of the ways to look at how we define Appalachia. Because if you just talk about rural Appalachia, for the most part, you're going to lose out on Black people. In the towns and cities, we're not the majority, but that's where we're concentrated at. And one of the factors I found in my research was that it was about jobs. It was about whether there's an industry there, hospital, or university. And those tend to be places that had opportunities for Blacks, whereas the other business, which are more, say, family or regional divided, were a little less willing to hire Black people in the rural areas.
I think we've got about 2 minutes left. So I just wanted to go ahead and echo and make sure you all see how many thank yous are in the chat. And maybe we should think about closing statements if you have any. It's been a wonderful discussion, though.
Thank you.
I hate to say that.
Yes. We knew our time constraints.
Well, I'll say in one last word, closing statement. Just thank Sister Ro for you all for organizing this. It's always a pleasure for me to be in conversation with these three gentlemen. So I think that this has been, you've given me food for more thought. So I deeply appreciate you organizing this, Sister Ro.
Thank you.
Well, I want to say to the lady, Susan Mead, I think, at Ferrum, and you say you're almost to retirement age, and you're thinking this and that. Well, I don't know if you can see me very well, but I've been retired a long time now, and I encourage anybody, don't quit. This is a lifelong work. Don't panic. Just pace yourself, and we'll all do this work until we're no longer on this earth. And Appalachia needs every mind, and particularly in terms of going out and finding and engaging with these young Black kids on these college campuses and helping them in their development. As I would say then, in terms of my comment about John Stevenson, who was one of the founders of the Appalachian Studies Association, the world needs more Johns. That's what I used to tell him all the time. So thank everybody on here who came to listen, and let's put these thoughts into action and make a difference in this world. That's our responsibility, I think.
Go ahead, Wilburn.
Just want to thank everybody for being here. And again, as Darren said, it's always a pleasure to meet with the brothers. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, I echo that. I want to thank the audience. Number one, even if you didn't ask questions or comment, we hope that this has been an enriching educational experience for you, as it has been for me. You know, it is important to recognize that we have a diverse geographically, topographically, class, environmentally. You know, the Black experience in Appalachia is amazingly diverse and rich, and certainly we've got some. You know, the presence of racism and white supremacy is a constant threat that has got to be undermined, attacked, confronted. And so as long as we have opportunities like this to engage in conversation, to acknowledge that we need that the allies, that there are folks who are committed to social justice and change, this is how we can soldier on and defeat folks who want to engage in hate. I thank you all for the opportunity. Wish you the best. Enjoy the rest of the day and the conference and the weekend. And with that, I will say goodbye.
Hasta la vista.
Okay. Thanks, Cicero, Wilburn, and Bill. It's good to see you. I'm going to jump over to the Friday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully, one of these days we'll catch up, Darren. Look forward to it, man.
Yeah, we've got to. After this week, I'll be sending out a note to everybody so that we can get together again to discuss the project. Okay.
Take care.
All right. Sounds good.
Bro.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.